Hello, I'm Mr. McBrien. This is TEJ2O Networking. So to form a context for what we're going to talk about today, first off I'd invite you to think about what claims the U.S. government made in late 2016 regarding the results of the U.S. election. If you're not familiar with it, go ahead and have a look at the New York Times article of December 29th. Essentially, to summarize, the U.S. government contends that the Russian government employed hackers with the idea of influencing the U.S. election. Now, there's a few things that are interesting here. First off, the idea that this is taken as somewhat normal in world politics today. There's also an interesting aspect of this in that certainly the reaction 20 or 30 years ago would have been total panic in the United States with the idea that Russia could have any influence on American politics. But also it's interesting to note no one is arguing that the result of the election should be reviewed in this context. Really, we're starting to come to the point of view that hacking itself is a political tool. And that's a troubling and interesting thing for us to keep in mind in the context of computer engineering. And I think that this will give us an interesting perspective on talking about networking itself. We won't get into internet security in too much detail here today, but we will talk about personal security. Okay, so how does that relate to the Ontario curriculum? We're going to talk about network concepts and security and services, and talk about ways to make a network secure from a personal perspective. Okay, but before we do that, let's cover a few basic concepts of networking. The types of network and things like this. So a network itself is just defined as two or more computers connected together. And this is a rather pedestrian, rather boring concept today, but was really quite exciting 40 years ago. At any rate, a peer-to-peer network is when a server isn't involved, and client-server is when a server is involved. And the benefits of a network are really quite dramatic. So we can have shared peripherals, so each computer doesn't have to have its own printer, for example. We can have shared storage. It's much more efficient to share one large storage device than it is to attempt to have a sufficient amount of storage on every device on a network or at a facility. We can have shared applications. This can have benefits from a financial point of view and from a consistency or workflow point of view. So we can be sure that every user has the same version of a given application. This also can have benefits in terms of rollout. An application can be updated for every user on a network. Now we can have improvements in reliability and resilience, if only from the point of view that we can move from one computer on the network that might be malfunctioning to a new computer in just a few seconds by getting up and moving across one seat, instead of having to either spend a day repairing a computer or spend several days ordering a new computer. We can have enhanced security through identifications and passwords. Centralized backup systems for data recovery, so closely related to cloud storage. And closely related to shared applications, we can have centralized virus protection to make sure that all computers are secure on a given network. There are lots of benefits of a LAN. Excuse me. In terms of types of networks, the most common networks we see are star networks with a centralized hub, and each machine running independently from the other ones. But we can also see other kinds of networks, such as a ring network, that have the benefit of not needing a network server. They can, however, have the downside of being vulnerable to going down simultaneously, all of them. And closely related to a ring network is a bus network, where instead of all the machines being connected in a ring, they're connected on a single line. Again, we have the issues of vulnerability of a bus network to go down. But it's very inexpensive to construct such a thing. Home networks tend to be star networks. We have seen a trend over the last decade or two towards home wireless networks. Many people view them as an absolute necessity today. So you don't see too many people looking to wire up networks in their homes. They tend to look at wireless networks as absolutely critical to their day-to-day functioning. And from that point of view, we'll spend a lot of time talking about these wireless networks today. Key components, pretty straightforward, and many of you are very familiar with this. So we need an ISP, so we need high-speed internet, and we need a modem to communicate with the service provider. We need a wireless router that'll communicate with the all of the devices on the network. And of course, we need the devices themselves, and we need them to be equipped with wireless. And we may see certain instances where given devices will be required or at least desirable to be connected up through wires still, and we'll just move them close enough to the router to wire them with an Ethernet cable. Again, some familiar stuff. Notebooks tend to be equipped with wireless by default, but we can very easily equip any modern desktop for wireless, either use it through USB or a PCI wireless card. And these devices, these USB devices now are so cheap that really there's no reason not to be comfortable with equipping standard desktops for wireless. Now, we're all very, very familiar with using our smartphones with wireless through Wi-Fi, and there are lots and lots and lots of other devices that are now equipped for Wi-Fi, and this now includes devices we might consider to be questionable. We can certainly have our thermostats in our house, and many of our appliances connect up to wireless. And this has separate security implications that pretty much go beyond today's discussion. I'd invite you to think of a list of all of the wireless enabled devices in your home and ask yourself what guarantees you have that these are secure. Now, there are still, even in today's world, there are still people who don't know how to secure their wireless networks. And we really should, regardless of the curriculum, should get through this. Anyone who doesn't have a secured wireless network has serious risks of having their personal information stolen, so identity theft. People can use your internet connection to do things that may have someone kicking down your door at some point if you're not careful. And from a less terrifying point of view, people can just use your bandwidth. So if you have limited bandwidth at home, you can find that someone else is using your internet and generating extra fees or preventing you from being able to watch Netflix successfully. So how do we secure our networks? Well, first off, we can talk about Wi-Fi protected access. And it's just an encryption program, so it essentially takes the information you send and encodes it so that it authenticates the communication. And it's one way to ensure that authorized people only are using your network. There are two kinds, and WPA2 is the newer, more secure version of this. And this is pretty much enabled on most modern devices. For older devices, there's wired equivalent privacy, and it really has serious issues with security. It may be necessary if you have some very old device that you want to connect to your wireless network, but there are security issues, as I said. The most secure approach is MAC filtering, and if you're concerned about the security of your network, this is a very secure approach, but has a few small hassles. So what it will do is enable you to, at the administrator level on your network, enable only specific devices according to their MAC address. And the MAC address is a unique address that's assigned to a given device. And if someone doesn't have a device that's on the list that you create, then they don't get in. It's that simple. So the only issue with this is that if you have a lot of visitors, if you're awfully popular, then you're going to spend a lot of time putting MAC addresses into your system in order to ensure that your friends can get access to your Wi-Fi. Some motivation for using some of the advanced security approaches. Microsoft has been very careful to advise that wired equivalent privacy is not secure enough anymore. And they recommend that you use a more secure approach like MAC address filtering or WPA. So, some motivation. When you're setting up your wireless network, set up an encryption passwords, of course, or MAC address filtering. Change your router name, and be sure and change your administrator password on your router. If you don't do those two things, steps 2 and 3, you may find that someone takes the trouble to actually lock you out of your own network. So security and secure use of your computers at home goes beyond wireless to a certain extent. We don't want to think that having secured wireless will ensure safe browsing in particular. So there are some things we should discuss at least briefly here. For starters, we should talk about firewalls. Now, this is a pretty good graphic of a firewall and what it does. Essentially, it is designed to prevent inappropriate traffic reaching your network. So it examines given data and looks for inappropriate material before it allows it to get onto your computers and into your computers. So it checks data on the internet, and it looks for things like viruses and worms and activity that is associated with hackers. So the good news is that Windows 7 and later versions of Windows have supported firewalls, and all you have to do is leave them enabled. So they default enable when you install Windows, and as long as you don't disable them, you shouldn't have any trouble. And really, they're pretty effective. You want to also allow them to check for updates periodically. Now, if you disable the firewall, then you have the issue where if you disable the firewall even on a single computer, it can infect every other computer on your network. But there are other approaches as well, simpler approaches to secure browsing. We've talked about wireless security, and we've talked about firewalls, and previously we talked about antivirus software. There is one additional way, a very powerful way to protect your computer from malware and viruses, and that is pretty simple. When you do day-to-day work, do not enable administrator privileges on your computer. Even if it's your computer, if you disable these, it can prevent malware and viruses from having access to the registry and other locations they need on your computer. And it really isn't that much hassle to create that user without privileges, who is you, and whenever something interesting happens, you'll be prompted to input your administrator password. And this will give you the chance to decide whether the website you're currently visiting should have complete access to your computer or not. And this may rescue you from having some very serious issues with your computers, even if it's just having to completely scrub them and reinstall Windows. But worse can happen for sure. Okay, let's talk about homework. What I'd like you to do is something very simple. Go home and check your home wireless security system. You may not have wireless at home, but chances are you do. Go ahead and check to see what your security type is. Is it secure? Check it out. And also, I'd invite you to do a little bit of research. So we normally look at home networks as being either you've got to pull Ethernet cable throughout your house, or you've got to go wireless. And those aren't the only options available. Go ahead and have a look. See what else you can find for options for home networks. And you might be surprised at what's possible. All right, over the coming days, we'll each take turns setting up the wireless router in the classroom. There's a hyperlink to the instructions, but you can simply do a search on that to retrieve those. And set up the wireless network, configure security. You don't need internet access to the router in order to do that, but you can configure the wireless security and use yours or one of your classmates' phones to access the router. You can use one of the wired computers in the classroom to set up the router in the network. Typically, the password is the login's admin and the password's admin. You can see where you direct your browser in order to access the browser. In order to access the interface, it's 192.168.1.1. And if one of your classmates changed the password, this is fine. You can use the reset button as per the instructions. So if it's your turn to use the router, go ahead and play with that. Thank you and have a great day.